Some stories begin in the most unlikely of places. In the sun-drenched farmlands of Oklahoma, a farmer named Tobias Marsh found the story of a lifetime on the snout of a pig. Chester, a massive Yorkshire pig, was a legend in his own right, having won countless ribbons at the state fair. But in the quiet moments of his life, something changed. For 3 straight days, he became obsessed with a single patch of dirt in his pen. This was no random animal instinct. This was an unrelenting, focused determination. Chester knew what he was looking for. Tobias watched as the pig's snout, raw and bleeding from the constant scraping against the earth, continued its work. Every time Tobias filled the 10-foot deep hole, Chester would return to the exact same spot and start digging again, with an almost human-like desperation. But what Tobias didn't know was that his prized pig had found something that should have stayed buried forever. For 23 years, Tobias had been raising livestock on this farm, a place built by his grandfather, and he had never seen anything like it. Chester barely touched his food, his body exhausted from the constant labor. His penmate, a smaller pig named Dolly, watched nervously from the corner, sensing the shift in the air. Tobias found himself drawn to the spectacle, leaning against the fence post, coffee mug in hand. He watched as Chester would occasionally pause, snorting heavily, as if listening for a faint whisper from deep below. It was unsettling. Other ranchers had told him pigs were smart, but this went beyond intelligence. This was an obsession. Tobias's late wife, Ruth, used to say animals could sense things humans couldn't. Earthquakes, storms, even death approaching. Tobias had always dismissed it as folklore, but now, staring at the methodical determination of his pig, he began to wonder, what could Chester possibly be sensing 20 feet underground? A buried water line? A forgotten root system? The answers felt mundane, but the pig's behavior was anything but. The situation escalated when Chester stopped digging and let out a low, mournful sound. Not a grunt or a squeal, but something that sounded almost like crying. Tobias stood frozen, the mug growing cold in his hand. In all his years, he had never heard an animal make a sound quite like that. And Chester was staring right at him, as if pleading with him to understand. Tobias finally gave in, his gut instinct overpowering his logic. That afternoon, he found himself back at the hole with a shovel in his hands. He had tried to dismiss Chester's behavior as an animal's instinct gone wrong, but that mournful cry had stayed with him. He climbed into the pen, causing Chester to back away reluctantly. The pig watched his every move as Tobias knelt beside the hole, running his hand along the walls. The soil felt different here, looser than the packed clay that made up most of his property. It was as if this section had been disturbed before. Tobias pushed the shovel into the bottom of the hole. It sank deeper than expected, meeting less resistance than it should have. He dug carefully, one shovel full at a time, while Chester paced behind him, snorting with what seemed like approval. 3 feet down, the shovel struck something that wasn't dirt or rock. Something that gave slightly under pressure, then pushed back. Tobias's heart rate quickened as he cleared away the soil around the obstruction. A piece of faded blue fabric emerged from the earth. As he brushed away more dirt, his fingers touched something smooth and curved. It was, unmistakably, a human ribcage. Tobias's hands began to shake as the reality hit him. Chester hadn't been digging randomly. The pig had somehow detected human remains buried beneath his pen. But who was down there? And how long had they been buried on his land? Tobias sat back on his heels, his mind racing. This ranch had belonged to his family for 3 generations, and there were no records of anyone being buried here. He looked back at Chester, who was watching him with an unsettling intelligence. The pig's silent vigil had led him to this shocking discovery. Tobias went to his house and pulled out the old photo albums Ruth had insisted on keeping. He searched for any clue about his family's history on this land. As he flipped through faded photographs, one image from 1923 stopped him cold. It showed his grandfather, Tobias Marsh, with several other men. One of them, a tall, lean man, wore the same style of blue shirt Tobias had just pulled from the grave. On the back of the photo, someone had written names: Jonas Samuel, Marcus Webb, Theodore Pike, Marcus Webb. The name resonated through the decades. In that moment, Tobias felt a profound and unsettling connection between the man in the photo and the bones in the ground. He returned to the pen as the sun began to set. Chester was waiting, lying beside the hole as if keeping watch. Tobias resumed digging, this time with a clear purpose. He could make out what appeared to be a complete skeleton, lying on its side, as if the person had been deliberately hidden. As he carefully removed more soil, Tobias discovered other items, mixed in with the remains. A leather belt with a distinctive silver buckle, a pair of worn boots, and something that made his blood run cold. A small metal star, tarnished with age, but still clearly recognizable as a sheriff's badge. The badge was engraved with Sheriff Marcus Webb and dated 1923, the same year as the photograph. The same man who stood with his grandfather. Tobias stared at the badge in his trembling hand. This pig had somehow led him to a century-old murder. But if Marcus Webb had been killed and buried here, that meant someone in his family knew about it. Someone had put him in the ground and kept the secret for over a century. Tobias spent the night searching through every family document. He found that Marcus Webb had been reported missing in 1923. But what disturbed him most were the dates. Webb had disappeared on September 15, 1923. According to his grandfather's journal, which Tobias had never bothered to read before, that was the exact same day Jonas Marsh had suddenly acquired a significant amount of money. The journal entry was chillingly brief. The Webb matter is settled. The implications were clear. His family hadn't just known about Webb's disappearance, they were involved. This was a dark secret that had been passed down through generations, buried in the soil, and now, finally, a pig had refused to let it stay hidden. As dawn broke, Tobias stood at the edge of the grave with the sheriff's badge in his hand. The weight of a century-old murder pressed down on him. Every board, every fence post, every improvement on his farm had been paid for with money from a crime. Chester wandered over and lay down at the base of the porch steps, his eyes never leaving Tobias's face as if he understood the magnitude of the decision being made. Tobias had to choose. He could protect his family's reputation and keep the ranch that had been his whole life, or he could expose the truth and honor the lawman who died trying to uphold it. Chester made that mournful sound again, and this time it sounded like a plea for justice that had been waiting 100 years to be heard. Tobias looked around his ranch, at the land that had sustained 3 generations, at the home where he'd planned to live out his days, all of it built on a foundation of murder and corruption. He thought about Ruth, who would have told him to do the right thing, regardless of the cost. If you were Tobias, what would you do? Would you honor your family's legacy and rebury the truth, or expose a century-old murder and face the destruction of everything you've worked for? Tell us in the comments. This is Forgotten Chronicle. History never forgets.